welcome to this episode of Trial Side News Africa Catalyst, produced and presented by Shabnam Palesa Mohamed, bringing you news that is happening on the African continent and news that is relevant to Africa's health. We're broadcasting from South Africa. Before I introduce our critical topic and our brilliant guest, let's help you to tune into and share this robust conversation. You can watch and share this broadcast from Trial Side News YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe, like, and comment. Our topic for this very first episode is Ivermectin. The Indian Bar Association serves a legal notice on WHO's chief scientist, Soumya Swaminathan, regarding disinformation and censorship. To unpack the legal notice and the implications for COVID-19 and public health, let's welcome to the Catalyst Advocate Dipali Ohja from the Indian Bar Association, Dr. Pierre Kory, Intensive Care Specialist and FLCCC President, and Dr. Tess Lawrie, EBMC Director and BIRD founding member. Welcome to the Catalyst.
Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's get straight into it. Advocate Ohja, what brought the Indian Bar Association to the point of wanting to issue a legal notice on WHO Chief Scientist Soumya Swaminathan? What is the cause of action?
So the trigger for us to issue the legal notice came on May 10th, when we had two contrasting views coming in. There was an announcement from the Health Minister of State of Goa in India, wherein the government of Goa had decided to have Ivermectin included in the line of treatment for people of Goa. And no sooner that the announcement came in, there was a tweet from Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, who is the chief scientist at WHO, and her tweet said, "Do not it is a WHO's stand not to use ivermectin, and the recommendation of WHO was against the use of ivermectin." And in this tweet, she had embedded a link, and this link took the reader to the company statement issued by pharmaceutical company Merck, and wherein there was a rationale, according to Merck, why ivermectin is not recommended. As to there were some, it said that there are no studies which support the efficacy and safety of the drug ivermectin for treatment of COVID-19. So at Indian Bar Association, we work on the principle that don't see who is right, see what is right. So we had these two contrasting views, wherein a state has decided to use ivermectin for treating COVID patients, and immediately there is a tweet coming in from the chief scientist WHO, Dr. Soumya, saying do not use it. And there was a lot of confusion. There were a lot of crisscross opinions on it as to how is this possible. And in fact, the immediate impact of her tweet was the state of Tamil Nadu, another state in India, withdrawing ivermectin from its protocol, state protocol, and they had included it earlier, but only after her tweet they had removed it. And we have an interesting update here. In fact, influenced by her tweet, there was a group in Goa who had filed a petition in the High Court questioning the state government's stand as to why is ivermectin being included when WHO has warned against its use. And the good part of it, the encouraging part of it, is the judgment was out just day before yesterday, and the court has ordered in favor of ivermectin. And in fact, we are trying to get the affidavit. To see what was stated by the state on affidavit. It is there in the news items which have been reported. So, if you permit me, I could just read out a few sentences from the news covering this development. The news goes: Advocate General, who is the advocate for the state of Goa, told the court that it is a decision taken by doctors and deliberated by the expert committee, and that there was an unnecessary uproar created about this issue, about its use. Advocate General said the drug has no side effects and has been advised by doctors. Further, now this is interesting, stating that the petitioner, the ones who filed this case, questioning the state government stand, those are the petitioners, stating that the petitioner has referred to the WHO directive recommending against its use. The court stated that the expert committee can apply its mind and vet this. The Advocate General said that the WHO initially said coronavirus was not contagious, not airborne, not transmissible, and it took 6 months to inform the people that it was a super spreader. The state government stated that it decided to give ivermectin to all suspected and symptomatic cases and to positive patients in home isolation kits. So you see, it's like a tight slap on the face of WHO because the court has ordered in favor of ivermectin. So these are the developments. This is, of course, the very recent developments. But as I said, the trigger for issuing the legal notice was this tweet and the announcement of State Health Minister on 10th of May. That was the point when Indian Bar plunged into this and we decided to conduct extensive research. We were aware of, in India, there was a white paper presented by Dr. Suryakant Tripathi from Lucknow. So we were aware of it. But after this incident of 10th of May, the tweet and the state announcement, we conducted in-depth research. And that was when we were led to the websites of FLCCC and BIRD. And there was like ocean of information, and we all at IBA were like so shocked that there is so much of data, and doctors are themselves coming and testifying, and they are saying that they have treated patients with mild, moderate, serious symptoms. And we just couldn't, we were very restless. It was very unsettling to know that there exists a drug which has brought people back from the doors of death. So why are people dying then? Why? And then it made a very strong case to go ahead and draft the legal notice and issue it upon her. So this was the immediate trigger.
Thank you, Advocate Ohja. I want to read, after that very important introduction into the reasoning behind this legal notice, paragraph 61, and then I'm going to turn the mic over to our doctors. Paragraph 61 of your legal notice says that you and the WHO, you mean Dr. Swaminathan, have misled and misguided all the people throughout the pandemic, starting from the delay in raising alarm soon after SARS-CoV-2 was detected in China, your failure to prevail over China in conducting an impartial investigation into the origins of the virus, inordinate time consumed before declaring remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, and convalescent plasma as ineffective treatment, ever-changing theories about SARS-CoV-2 being transmitted through droplets or it being airborne. The world is gradually waking up to your absurd, arbitrary, and fallacious approach in presenting concocted facts as scientific approach. And then, of course, you quote Abraham Lincoln: you can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all of the time. Dr. Kory and Dr. Lawrie, what are your thoughts on the IBA legal notice, and what would you like to contribute from a medical, legal, and ethical perspective? Let's start with Dr. Kory.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, it was a breath of fresh air. We, Dr. Lawrie's group, my group, we're voices of what we believe, not we believe. We're trying to advocate for scientific data and truth of a very effective therapy that can save lives. And unfortunately, that information is being distorted, suppressed, and dismissed. And to see it happening from a global health leader is appalling. It's actually terrifying. And to see another voice coming out to join us, which is now, a bar association, a group of lawyers who are seeing that these are really violations of the public good, and probably criminal. There's evidence here of corruption, and I think they recognize that. And so I'm just reassured that we have more support in trying to advocate and trying to just disseminate good medical knowledge to the world, to the doctors, to the people, so that they can help themselves if they were to get sick. And just like Dipali said, when Goa decided to very overtly and very publicly depart from WHO recommendations, that was a major sign that people know that the WHO is not giving good guidance. And that list of things that they've gotten wrong or been delayed about, it just shows that they're not an organization built to the task of managing this pandemic, not in a rapid way, not in an efficient way, and not in an accurate way, and not in an impartial way. There's clearly multiple influences that prevent them from doing that. And so I think it's a broken organization. And I also think that everyone in the world looks to it as some sort of source of expertise and guidance to navigate out of this pandemic. And that's because of many decades of incredible public health successes. But those successes are historic. They're not current. They're not doing well. In the last 2 decades, in fact, they've failed at managing multiple public health emergencies. And so I think it needs to be recognized that we need to stop looking to them for guidance. The more you do that, the more the people will get hurt. And that's what I want to say.
Thank you for that, Dr. Kory. Dr. Lawrie, you're quite familiar with how the WHO works in terms of research and recommendations on medicine and health. So what are your thoughts on the IBA's legal notice, and what would you like to contribute to this effort?
Well, firstly, I would just like to say I'm so very grateful to Advocate Ohja and her team, because it's just so wonderful to feel supported at last. We've, by lawyers. I think us doctors have been, really up against quite powerful forces, and not being heard, and just witnessing thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people dying unnecessarily certainly since I became aware of the evidence, which was after Pierre's known much longer than me. So, I just feel enormously grateful that there's some action being taken, and we can shift this situation we're in, where we have this monstrous organization now determining health policy for the world, and they just don't deserve to be holding that very important position at this time because of the flawed decisions that they're making. What was the rest of the question, Shabnam?
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the legal notice, and what would you like to contribute to this effort?
Well, I'm very happy and standing by to assist Advocate Ohja in any way that she needs. Certainly, in terms of the evidence that we have and have presented, and working with Pierre, and we just want to get Ivermectin approved as soon as possible around the world. So whatever I can do to help.
Absolutely. And of course, this legal notice is really well laid out, and I'm able to say that from my perspective. It goes into Dr. Swaminathan's views and statements, and it goes into studies and trials. It goes into cases in the US where people had to go to court, the intervention of the courts, the cognizance of the public statement by the FLCCC on irregular actions by PHAs, and the widespread disinformation campaign against Ivermectin, the clinical trial guidelines for management issued by the ICMR, the main grounds of this legal notice, the falling standards of the WHO, and of course commendable work by select courageous medical doctors who've lived up to their Hippocratic oath. Advocate Ohja, the WHO's Soumya Swaminathan doctor deleted her tweet, which cover-up is referenced in the IBA's legal papers, in which she utilizes Merck to justify the WHO's obstruction of Ivermectin. What does that say to you about censorship of the right to information, which is of course a right in the law? And after that, I want to ask the doctors, what does that censorship say about medical ethics and the right to health and life? Let's start with Advocate Ohja.
Now, regarding the censorship of right to information, we had, an experience of it after the notice was circulated, this legal notice, when it was circulated in the social media. What happened is, immediately on the next day, few of the links, the contents on few of the links which are included in the notice were either removed or deleted. So in the press release that Indian Bar Association released on May 26th, we have included our observation in the concluding para that it's really unfortunate, and it's like an cowardly act on part of all the forces which are resorting to such censorship of removing the contents, so that people stay deprived of the efficacy and effectiveness of ivermectin in treatment of COVID. So this was our immediate experience after this notice was sent out and widely circulated. And to our surprise, after the press note was circulated, the content was brought back from the links. It was visible on the link. So this was our first-hand experience. Moreover, we had read about, Dr. Kory's video on the YouTube being removed after it crossed, a very high viewership on the YouTube. And we have also come across, some similar experiences narrated by physicians and scientists, wherein wherever they had come and, explained the positive impact or positive effects of ivermectin in the treatment, all such information was being, taken away or ensured that it does not, come to the knowledge of common people or other people. So I would say that right to information should be like a free-flowing. You cannot, one authority cannot decide that this is the information which you would have access to, and you would not have to, you cannot access a particular information, or nobody else would decide that this is the right thing and you are, given access only to this information. No, it has to be impartial. The scope should be healthy, and it should be for the user, the consumer, the person to decide and analyze. So he should get to see both sides of it, plus and minus, the negatives and the positives. So that is a real right of information.
Thank you, Advocate Ohja. Dr. Kory, your thoughts on the censorship? Of course, we're talking about that tweet that was deleted, but also in general, the censorship of information on ivermectin and early treatment. I know you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's appalling that there seems to be this essentially a global consensus amongst major mainstream media organizations that only information that comes from the public health agencies should be discussed or talked about. It's a suppression of science. It really curtails scientific discussion and the exchange of a free flow of ideas and discoveries and experiences in treating, and it's harming people. I cannot think of a time in history when censorship has ever been a good idea. There's no great thinker in history and no historian who has ever concluded that censorship is a good idea. And to do it around science and scientific discussion is appalling. And I think, of the many, we just talked about the WHO and how they're failing. And I'm sorry to sit here and point fingers, but this global decision of all, I would say, major Western media to avoid discussion of ivermectin because the gods of science and knowledge and the public health agencies have determined that it's an unproven therapy, they're not doing their job. Where are the science desks? Where are the investigative reporters? Where are those who are looking at the data like Advocate Ohja did and her group and our group? I mean, the data is there, it's credible, and yet nothing's being discussed and no one will do a story. And it's preventing, again, the global population from learning about a life-saving therapy of one of the safest medicines known in history. 4 billion doses. It's been distributed throughout many continents around the world for decades. It's cheap and widely available, and the existing evidence shows that it can save lives to a huge degree, and that is being suppressed and not discussed. It's the censorship is terrible, and I think the whole field of journalism has to look at what they're doing and leaving alone social media. Social media is as well captured as the mainstream media, but I just. This needs to be reckoned and this needs to be examined. You can't do this to serious scientists, and it's hurting people.
Dr. Tess Lawrie, what are your thoughts on the WHO's chief scientist deleting her tweet, and of course, in general, on the censorship that you've seen and you've experienced?
Well, my first contact with scientific misinformation that has occurred around ivermectin was really on the 18th of January when I had a meeting with Dr. Andrew Hill, because Andrew Hill was commissioned to do a review of ivermectin some months before and by Unitaid and WHO. And when I read the review, I was absolutely horrified because Andrew Hill had shown that ivermectin reduced deaths by 75%, But then throughout the paper, there's this undermining of that evidence. And then in his conclusions, he states, but regulatory authorities cannot look at ivermectin or prove it until large randomized trials are done. So there was this mismatch between his conclusions and his findings. And so I had a meeting with him. And in that meeting, he told me that his conclusions were informed by his sponsor. And so they were not his own. And so, I said to him, this will cause immeasurable harm and please retract the paper, which he never did. But that paper actually kicked ivermectin down the road. Now, the paper's never been published. It was on a preprint server. And I don't know if it's been peer reviewed, but it's a very poor paper. And it served as a barrier to the approval of ivermectin worldwide. And in the UK, our regulatory authorities, the Medicines Health Product Regulatory Agency, has used it in emails to me to say this is the reason why there's insufficient evidence and more trials are needed. So that paper had its conclusions reflected its findings. On the 18th of January, ivermectin should have been approved worldwide, but it wasn't. And months of deaths and suffering have occurred, and unnecessarily.
And I can add a little bit to that because both Tess, Dr. Lawrie, and myself had multiple contacts with Dr. Hill, and Tess did ask him to retract that paper and to revise it, as did myself and Dr. Marek. In fact, we peer reviewed that paper, and we pointed out numerous inaccuracies and negative descriptions of ivermectin's efficacy and the mechanisms of action, which we knew he knew were inaccurate. And we told him that we thought this was examples of scientific misconduct, and he assured us that he would revise the paper shortly. As more trials were coming in, he again delayed and dismissed that review, and he has never updated that paper. And I agree with Dr. Lawrie, that paper as it stands now has done immeasurable harm. And the paper is still not out. It's still not peer reviewed, and I don't know when we'll see it. But luckily, many other groups, including Dr. Laurie's, have done their own reviews since. And right now, there's 5 published reviews that are not getting the attention they have. It's Dr. Laurie's paper is coming out in peer review very shortly, but her bird organization did an independent guideline development, and that's effectively a peer review document. Our paper was published. There's a group from Japan led by Satoshi Omura, the Nobel Prize winner, another group from Italy, and also Spain. And so, the evidence is there, the scientific evidence is there, and yet it's being ignored.
So that term of scientific misconduct is certainly one that needs to be interrogated thoroughly so that the lessons that we've learned during COVID-19 never repeat themselves. Advocate Ohja, India's human rights lawyers have a very proud history of tackling unethical multinational corporations, especially the monopoly of pharmaceutical companies. And this is evident in the groundbreaking Novartis and Bayer cases related to cancer drugs, amongst other cases. What is the process going forward for this ivermectin case? Will the IBA rely on national or international law? Are there other stakeholders that you're thinking of serving legal notice on? And finally, what relief is the IBA driving towards? Are you looking for emergency use authorization of ivermectin, or do you just want full rollout at the discretion of doctors in every country?
Well, I would like to update everyone about what is the position of IBM in India. IBM is included in the National Protocol for COVID-19 management. It was included first on 22nd of April 2021, and as of date, it is continued as per the last update by Government of India on May 24th, 2021. So it is included under the May Do category, which is it can be used for patients with mild symptoms and who are in home isolation. So this is what the national protocol says as far as ivermectin is concerned. Now, I had just explained the case of what happened in state of Goa. and the judgment which has come just day before, it is in favor of ivermectin. There are four states in India, state of Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Karnataka, and Goa, where ivermectin is being used in the line of treatment. Now, we are going to have a multi-pronged strategy. Right now our team is working up on drafting a representation to Government of India, wherein we would be pulling in all the data that supports use of ivermectin not only as prophylaxis but also for treating serious symptoms, mild, moderate, serious symptoms. So definitely we would require help from physicians, scientists who could build a strong case as to which will prove that and make a strong case for recommending ivermectin for treatment of COVID to bring down the hospitalization cases. So this is what we are currently working on. At the same time, the apex court in India, the Supreme Court, is hearing matters across all the states. Like the matters in each state are being clubbed together and are heard by Supreme Court of India. The matter is being heard it's being heard right now after the court vacation. So we are considering intervening in it, and one of the points which are being considered are around the drugs which would be used for COVID-19 management. So we are thinking of filing an intervention application which would request the states and Government of India to include ivermectin in the line of treatment, prophylaxis as well as a line of treatment. And of course, as far as this incident, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the case of the disinformation campaign against ivermectin, we are going ahead with the criminal prosecution of Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, and not only Soumya Swaminathan, but our team is working out on who all could be joined as co-accused in this case, who all should be held responsible. So this is what our team is currently working on.
Dr. Kory and Dr. Lawrie, any thoughts on what Advocate Dipali Ohja has just shared with us in terms of the course of action, the direction in which they're going, and in particular other stakeholders that probably need to be added to legal notice?
I'm just so impressed with the work that they're trying to do. I'm just encouraged because it's going to bring attention to the misdeeds that have occurred, and that's an understatement, right? And to hear that actually this would be a criminal complaint, I think is justified. And I don't know if it's to the chief scientist, but it's certainly to those who came around that ivermectin recommendation. It's my opinion that the March 31st living guideline update to the treatment of COVID-19, the section on ivermectin, from the first word of that section to the last, it is 100% negative. It's written with a complete and total bias with one goal, which was to arrive at a non-recommendation for ivermectin. I believe that group, whoever was responsible, whoever the writers were under a mandate to come up with a recommendation against use. And they succeeded in doing that. And the only way they did that is literally dismissing a large body of evidence. And I think that was the criminal action, and they're the ones who should be held responsible. And I also think that Advocate Ohja should talk to Dr. Hill and find out more about how that scientific manuscript was written by sponsors who were not authors on the paper and clearly wrote conclusions that were inconsistent with the data presented, like Dr. Lawrie just mentioned.
And I think another thing that's just so striking in the whole conduct of WHO is the disinformation that has been disseminated around safety of ivermectin, and in fact all the authorities, this emphasis on that it might be dangerous, is just so glaringly flawed and doubles. When you look at the vaccine harms, because I've been following the WHO's Vigi Access database with regard to COVID vaccines and ivermectin. And the vaccines today, there's almost 1 million adverse drug reactions reported and 5,500 and something deaths, compared with ivermectin, which is around 20 deaths since 1992. So we're talking in the last few months, just on one database, we have nearly 1 million adverse drug reactions. So how dare they say that ivermectin is dangerous and unsafe when they are absolutely silent on the harms being reported against the vaccines.
And Dr. Lawrie, you've said it before. Them questioning the safety of ivermectin goes against prior documents published by the WHO for different programs and other diseases, which really emphasize the profound safety of the drug. So there's clear evidence that they are. There's clear evidence that they have a mandate to somehow call into question or doubt the ivermectin. They do not want ivermectin used. And
that's the bottom line. They just don't want it used. Advocate Ohja, of course, you're picking up very valuable information from both Dr. Pierre Kory and Dr. Tess Lawrie. Before we move forward, would you like to comment on anything they've just mentioned?
Well, can I make one more point on the fact that they don't want it used? I just want to emphasize that their desire to not have it used is a non-scientific objective that has nothing to do with the science or efficacy. There's another incentive that's causing them to do that, and they're not behaving according with science. And so I just want to emphasize that.
Well, I mean, I'm not an investigative journalist, but I have been starting to look into what could these other reasons be that have been creating these barriers. And it just has to be money and conflicts of interest around these novel pharmaceutical drugs, therapies. Because even, the McMaster's University that conducted the systematic review that underpins the guideline seems to be developing vaccines. So if it's developing vaccines, then it's clearly got conflicts of interest in being involved in the evaluation of a treatment of an old medicine that is cheap and works for prevention as well.
Well, that leads exactly into what the Advocate Ohja had drafted in those papers, specifically the mention of the word agenda, the agenda of the chief scientist for the WHO and other stakeholders that are involved. And of course, both our doctors raising the issue of conflict of interest. Do you want to speak to that, Advocate Ohja?
Right. So in this legal notice, we have brought up an additional point. It was regarding the tweet of 10th of May, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. She had embedded the link to the company statement of Merck. But I was wondering, how did she forget that Merck, there is a possibility that Merck had conflict of interest because it is itself, manufacturing another antiviral for COVID-19, and if I remember the name correctly, it's molnupiravir. So when it is into, and it is in the trial stage right now, it is in clinical trial stage. So obviously, how does it go? It is certainly it's going to say no, ivermectin is not safe. Besides, ivermectin is off patent, so it is pretty cheap. So it's very obvious that this is the reason why IBM is being blocked, because they have their interests in the new drug that they are launching. And this could be the case with other pharma companies also, who have lots of money at stake, who have invested heavily into new antivirals and vaccines for COVID-19.
I also think it's a good example. It's a disturbing example of how embedded the pharmaceutical companies are in an organization like the WHO. I mean, she's literally referencing a statement of a pharmaceutical company which has multiple competing financial interests against ivermectin currently. It's not only the oral antivirals, but they also have interest in the vaccines and stakes in the vaccines. And so it's absurd. It's absurd that they would cite a company statement which has no scientific basis, right? Those three statements that Merck put out are so easily disprovable by peer-reviewed published literature that it's absurd that they're allowed to stand.
I have to say that the UK authorities are using that statement too. So, they all seem to be using Merck's statement to underpin their failure to approve ivermectin.
And that's because the pharmaceutical companies have always been the most objective entities at evaluating the science behind therapies. Is that right, Dr. Lawrie?
Yeah, it would seem that way.
Well, it takes us back to that disinformation playbook that I think Advocate Ohja would really have a good time reading through. Advocate Ohja, I see your notice is copied to the President of India, Prime Minister of India, Governors of all states, Minister of Home Affairs, Health and Family Welfare, Director of Intelligence, the Director of the CBI, Chief Ministers of all states of India, And it goes on to at least 15 different stakeholders, including the DG of the ICMR, the DG of the AIIMS, the IMA National President, Drugs Controller of India, Director of the National Institute of Virology, the Chairman of the National Medical Commission, and the Southeast Asia Office of the WHO, which is, of course, based in Delhi, India. Are you expecting opposition from any of these parties that are going to put up a defense and say, actually, you have no case? And if that happens, what will be your recourse?
Well, sir, opposition certainly not, because we are witnessing support, from government who has included ivermectin in the national protocol. In fact, the representation that we are working on, through this representation, we would be requesting government of India to consider ivermectin in the treatment, in the line of treatment, not only as prophylaxis. And then we had this, the judgment of court, the Bombay High Court, which came in day before yesterday. It was like, it was very heartening, and it was very encouraging, because it was in favor of ivermectin. We also got to know that there is one public interest litigation which is filed here in Maharashtra, and it is being heard currently. And it is to request inclusion of ivermectin as not only as prophylaxis, but also in the treatment in state of Maharashtra. So you see, there is a lot of positive things happening around IBM in India. So we at Indian Bar do not really sense strong opposition coming through. If there is any opposition, or if there is any, I would rather say, obstruction to the government in rolling out or in carrying forward what they have set in the national protocol, it is by WHO. And just to add, see, just see how the disinformation campaign continues. The tweet was on 10th of May, which, the repercussions were the state of Tamil Nadu withdrawing IBM, and there was a complaint filed in the court of Goa. On May 16th, I have included another interview, a reference to another interview on this YouTube channel Mojo Story. So I have mentioned from, a time markup from where there's a question posed to the director, the chief scientist of WHO, regarding her views on ivermectin. But during the, this question, while this question was being posed, there was a reconfirmation by host, and the company statement of Merck is displayed on the screen, with highlights, which says that there is no sufficient data to prove efficacy and safety of the drug. So the host reconfirms with WHO, and she says that, okay, you have said that you have time and again warned people not to use ivermectin, but it is still being used. So this is the manner in which WHO is trying to, carry forward its disinformation campaign, to imbibe on the minds of people, to create confusion, to mislead them. Because we have news channels who are taking up, or who rather pose this question to the public as to why are drugs being included which are advised by WHO as not to use for COVID. So there is a lot of chaos, there is a lot of confusion, and WHO is responsible to create this confusion here in India. It is actually creating obstruction in, rolling out of IBM in India.
Dr. Kory, talk to us a little bit about the Disinformation Playbook. I think it's an opportune time to bring that into the conversation.
Well, it's something I had to learn. We've been struggling to get the science on. It's not just the censorship, but, for months, myself and our organization, we were writing rebuttals to public health agencies when we saw their reviews of the evidence. And there was this consistent and reproducible actions where they literally ignored large parts of the evidence, or they misrepresented it, or they de-emphasized it in ways that we found deplorable, especially for a safe medicine. And we kept thinking that this was some sort of data argument, that this is some differences in how we interpret the scientific evidence. And I will say that others began to write to myself and the organization to tell us about that these all had the hallmarks of what's called disinformation. And what disinformation is, it's a series of practices generally by political or corporate interest, and it's not all corporations, it's a minority, but it's actions that they take when the existing science interferes with their corporate or financial interests. And so they seek to distort and dismiss and cause doubt around the scientific evidence. And it was first pioneered by the tobacco industry. They were masterful at it. They did 50 years of trying to convince the world that one of the most toxic substances in mankind was actually either good for you or not harmful, right? So they invented the playbook, but that's a playbook that has been adopted by many different corporate interests when they see science going against their bottom line. And when I read the article, the Disinformation Playbook it's an organization called the Union for Concerned Scientists. It sort of opened my eyes, because as I saw the playbook and the tactics that they described, I could see it all around me. I saw everything they were doing around ivermectin, and it really proved to me that it was not a scientific argument anymore. I thought I was making scientific arguments, and I couldn't understand why no one was listening to them. Same thing with Dr. Lawrie, made the most credible scientific arguments. It's not about the science. They want you to believe it's about the science. It's not about the science. It's about their interests. And their interest is to distort, delay, dismiss the knowledge of efficacy around this medicine. And it's to further their own interests, whether it's competing molecules or to continue the march of this global vaccination industry. And so we're trying to fight against disinformation. And I think Advocate Ohja is going to be a formidable partner, and her organization, in this fight. We do need legal help with this if we can get it. We're not lawyers. I'm just a lowly doctor.
Dr. Lawrie, you are South African born. Our South African Constitution speaks about the necessity of the judiciary to consider international law. Now, India succeeds with this matter. It certainly sets a precedent in South African courts to be able to now lean upon that judgment, because that's where it's headed towards court, to say that ivermectin needs to be rolled out as early treatment, and not via Section 21 applications, and not via scripts to doctors, where the majority of South African population cannot even afford to go to the doctor. What are your thoughts on the implication from that perspective on the lives of the poorest of the poor? And do you think that India's judgment will have as much of an impact in the UK, where millions of people are protesting against lockdown regulations?
I think it will have a massive impact on countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, the whole of Asia, I think, and Africa and South America. I think low- and middle-income countries, I think they are teetering on the brink, basically, of, I think they see what's happening. And I think if India rolls out, I think we'll see rollout in those countries too. UK and Europe and America are so in the grip of big pharma and whatever it is, the powers that be, that I think they will stall as long as they can. And I think probably we'll need to take similar legal actions here to save lives and actually get effective early treatments for the public. Not actually only early treatments, because ivermectin works for long COVID too. That's becoming more and more apparent from doctors' reports and patient experiences. So, we have something that can actually help millions of people right now, and it's being withheld from them. So, I think as soon as the public are aware of that, we're going to see legal action all over the place.
India certainly setting about to set a very important precedent in terms of the right to health, and of course leading the way towards an end of the lockdown. That's the direction in which we're headed. Advocate Ohja, the WHO is described as a specialized agency of the United Nations responsible for international public health. The WHO Constitution establishes the agency's governing structure and principles, and states that its main objective is the attainment by all peoples the highest possible level of health. Could the IBA support, in the context of what we know now regarding ivermectin, could the IBA support the call for a new WHO, alternatively, a People's Health Organization to be formed that represents the interests of the people over the interests of those who profit from campaigning against the interests of the people?
IBA acknowledges the good work, all good work done by WHO in past years, but the organization as it is now, it is like there is a big question on its credibility, whether what it is supposed to do Is it living up to its expectations is a big question, and almost everybody has started doubting whether our lives are safe if WHO is in charge of our lives and is responsible for guiding us through getting out of this pandemic, overcoming the pandemic, and going back to the lives as we were living before the pandemic. So yes, Indian Bar would definitely support a call for a new structure. So it could be either a very strong changes in the structure that it is right now, or it could be a totally different organization which has its own set of rules. There is accountability, there is transparency, and basically the people who are in charge, they would be made liable for civil as well as criminal action against them if there is a proven misbehavior on part of any of the officials. So that is what.
So those are some good thoughts in terms of governance and of course possible support to the IBA. Dr. Kory, are you finding that an increasing number of doctors and scientists are of the same view that what we need is a people's health organization?
Oh, I mean, everyone who has been involved with this ivermectin issue and seeing how it's led to just inadequate medical guidance. I mean, we need a structure that's much more in line with patient interest and that's going to serve the health of the people. I mean, the organization as it's structured now and as it's run is certainly failing to do that. And Dr. Lawrie has brought it up, as well as some others that we're working with, that really we need an organization that's much more closely allied with people's interests and not corporate and outside influences. I mean, that is absolutely clear. And I'll also say that's not a new sentiment, right? So there is an organization called the Independent WHO, and it's formed by disaffected scientists who saw that the WHO were not acting in the public health interest, and they formed their own organization. That organization tends to center itself around radiation and the harms of radiation safety because of the WHO's actions around their reports on Fukushima and Chernobyl. But it's the same story, just a different cause, is that those recommendations and guidance are not in the people's interest.
We are
Dr. Lawrie, what would a new People's Health Organization look like? I mean, your perspective as a scientist, as a researcher, what would it look like? What would change?
I think the centralized structure doesn't work or anymore, perhaps. What we are looking at and discussing with other medical groups, doctor groups around the world, and also allied health professionals and patient interest bodies is something like an international council of health and well-being, where individual groups maintain their autonomy and subscribe really to. So it's not a top-heavy centralized system, but where protocols can be drawn up and agreed upon by health professionals and shared for prevention, with emphasis on preventive, safe treatments, safe practices actually, and that are shared amongst affiliated bodies and that's very patient. Where the public play an active role in those discussions around health, and responsibility for keeping themselves healthy. So I think the whole system needs to change.
Absolutely. And of course, certainly the role of media and social media will arise sharply into question, given what we've learned about censorship and disinformation around COVID-19, and specifically on ivermectin. I want to start rounding up this interview by asking the doctors this question: 7 to 8 months in this global campaign for treatment, specifically ivermectin, what role do you now see advocacy and solidarity playing? Doctors, activists, journalists, lawyers, civil society, in saving lives and livelihoods. What will the solidarity change in public health? Dr. Kory.
Well, I mean, I am seeing growing solidarity. That's what I want to I want to try to maybe finish on a positive point, because Unfortunately, our advocacy, our scientific advocacy, had to be grassroots. We couldn't advance our cause through the traditional halls or structures of science. We were being obstructed there. And so we had to speak directly to the people and to other colleagues and scientists. And so we now have a network, including an organization that you're a part of and helped forward, of people, like-minded people around the world who are noticing the failure of these bodies. And so that system and groups of like-minded, our group is called the FLCCC. I always say there's many FLCCCs around the world now, and we are collaborating and we are trying to advance, without conflict of interest. We're actually following our oaths and our true duties as professionals, as physicians, as researchers, and I find that really encouraging. And so I think that's the only way the world has ever changed, right? Is that is advances by small groups of like-minded people, right? Mm-hmm. And so I am encouraged to see that unfolding, and it's an honor and it's very satisfying to be a part of it. I just wish there was many more of us. But the numbers are increasing every day. And so may that continue and may more people join us.
Dr. Lawrie, what is your most inspiring and practical message to fellow doctors, scientists, and the public? What's the call to action?
Well, I agree with Dr. Kory in that, there are more and more people coming towards, seeing the light, shall we say. And in a way, Ivermectin, although it's been a really bad story, if you think about the loss, it's actually a very positive one because really brought everyone together. It's brought civil society and the legal, people in the legal profession, medical profession, and even some people from industry side of things. So I think it's actually been really it's going to be a very unifying experience because I think we're all going to unify around ivermectin, and we're going to stand up for ivermectin, and by doing that we are, I think, ultimately we're showing our collective humanity, and we are going to create a better world when this is done. And we're in the process of doing that.
You're in the process of doing that. I want to give the last word to Advocate Dipali Ohja. The purpose of law is the pursuit of justice. And clearly what we're seeing is that ivermectin is the straw that's taking the proverbial, camel's back here, because there's bigger issues concerning public health, democracy, and freedom that we need to interrogate. Advocate Ohja, do you have a message for lawyers around the world to join the IBA, to collaborate with the IBA for public health and freedom?
Yes, IBA would take this opportunity to give a clarion call to advocates, lawyers all around the world to join us, and together we take this fight ahead and save humanity and do our service to the humankind.
Thank you very much to our brilliant guest today, Advocate Dipali Ohja from the Indian Bar Association, Pierre Kory, Dr. Pierre Kory from the FLCCC President, and Dr. Tess Lawrie from EBMC, and one of the founding members of BIRD, for joining us in this first edition of the Catalyst on Trial Site News Africa.
Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you, Shabnam.
Well, that's it for the first edition of The Catalyst, brought to you by Trial Site News Africa. We thank you again, Advocate Dipali Ohja, Dr. Pierre Kory, and Dr. Tess Lawrie. Thank you also to Trial Site News Africa and Trial Site News listeners and viewers. Remember to download the Trial Site News app, and please remember to challenge censorship by sharing this broadcast of Catalyst across all your platforms, and follow Trial Site News on social media. Until the very next episode, we will see you again interrogating all matters of public health related to the African continent and relevant to the African continent and around the world. Take care. Goodbye.